I stood there stunned, my arms full of Christmas presents and homemade pies, as my sister Amanda peered through the barely opened door of my own lakeside cottage. The chain lock I'd installed last summer jangled mockingly. "Don't make a scene." "You know why?" she whispered, her eyes avoiding mine. Behind her, I heard my parents laughing, glasses clinking. 3 months of planning this perfect family Christmas, and now I was locked out of my own property. As Amanda began closing the door, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice sounded almost bored as I explained my situation. "Sir, you're saying you've been locked out of your own property?" Her skepticism was palpable even through the phone. I tried to keep my voice steady despite the cold December air biting through my jacket and the sight of my breath forming clouds in front of my face. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying," I replied, balancing my phone between my ear and shoulder while setting down the heavy box of presents on the snow-covered porch. "This is my property. I've owned this lakeside cottage for 5 years. The truth was, this place meant everything to me. When my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, he left me this cottage by Evergreen Lake. It wasn't just any inheritance. It was the place where I'd spent every summer growing up, learning to fish, swim, and appreciate nature. Grandpa John had been more of a father to me than my actual father ever was. After my divorce 3 years ago, this cottage became my sanctuary, my true home. I should explain who I am. My name is Frederick Anderson, 34 years old, and I work as an architectural engineer in the city. My life had followed a predictable pattern until my ex-wife Tracy decided our marriage lacked passion and left me for her yoga instructor. The cottage became my salvation, the place where I slowly rebuilt myself. Over the past year, I dedicated every weekend to renovating the place, turning what was once a rustic fishing cabin into a cozy, modern retreat. New hardwood floors throughout, a state-of-the-art kitchen with granite countertops, and a master bathroom that could rival any luxury hotel. But I'd been careful to preserve the charm. The stone fireplace remained untouched, as did the handcrafted bookshelves my grandfather had built decades ago. My relationship with my family had always been complicated. My parents, Eleanor and Robert Anderson, never tried to hide their favoritism toward my younger siblings. Amanda, 31, was the artistic genius of the family with her photography career, while Jake, 28, was the entrepreneur with his series of startup ventures that somehow always needed family funding. I was just the reliable one, the one who always had his life together, which somehow made me boring in their eyes. Despite this lifelong dynamic, I desperately wanted to heal the wounds. After spending last Christmas alone, I decided this year would be different. 3 months ago, I called my parents and proposed hosting everyone at the cottage. To my surprise, they sounded genuinely enthusiastic. "What a wonderful idea, Frederick," my mother had exclaimed. "We haven't had a proper family Christmas in years." That call sparked a frenzy of preparations. I took 2 weeks off work to get everything perfect. I spent thousands of dollars renovating the guest rooms, adding new queen-sized beds, luxury linens, and ensuite bathrooms for everyone. I meticulously planned a gourmet menu, ordering a heritage turkey from a local farm, and specialty ingredients from stores all over the state. I even hand-selected wines that would pair perfectly with each course. The decorations were another labor of love. I'd strung thousands of lights around the property, placed poinsettias on every windowsill, and spent hours choosing the perfect 8-foot Douglas fir that now stood in the living room, adorned with antique ornaments that had been in our family for generations. I'd created personalized gifts for each family member, a leather-bound portfolio of Amanda's best photography work, a custom business plan template and organizational system for Jake's latest venture, and a European river cruise package for my parents' upcoming anniversary. "Sir, are you still there?" The dispatcher's voice pulled me back to my current predicament. "Yes, sorry. I'm still here," I replied, noticing that more lights had come on inside the cottage. Through the frosted window, I could see silhouettes moving around what appeared to be my living room. "We'll send an officer to your location, but it may take about 30 minutes. We're handling several weather-related incidents right now." I thanked her and ended the call, then decided to try the back door. As I trudged through the ankle-deep snow around to the rear of the cottage, I could hear laughter and music coming from inside. Anger and confusion fought for dominance in my mind. What possible reason could they have for locking me out of my own home? When I reached the back door, I immediately went to the loose brick in the patio wall, where I kept a spare key hidden. My heart sank when I found the hiding spot empty. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately taken my spare key, and my family had intentionally locked me out of my own property. I tried peering through the back windows, but the curtains had been drawn. I knocked loudly on the door, calling out, "This is ridiculous! Let me in!" But the music inside only seemed to get louder, drowning out my protests. Defeated, I returned to the front porch to wait for the police. As I sat on the top step, I noticed my breath growing more visible in the increasingly cold night air. The temperature was dropping rapidly as darkness fell, and the weatherman had predicted it would reach 15 degrees tonight. I pulled my coat tighter around me and tried to make sense of what was happening. Why would my family do this? What could possibly justify locking me out of my own home after I'd spent months preparing for their visit? And more puzzlingly, who else was in there with them? The cottage wasn't small, but it wasn't designed for a crowd either. I'd prepared accommodations for my parents, Amanda, Jake, and Amanda's boyfriend, whom I'd never met. But I was sure I'd seen more people moving around inside than just those 5. As I sat there feeling the cold seep through my clothes, I couldn't help but wonder if this whole Christmas plan had been a mistake from the start. Perhaps some rifts can't be healed, no matter how much effort you put into trying. 30 minutes stretched into 45 in the bitter cold before I finally saw headlights approaching down the private road that led to my cottage. Relief washed over me as the police cruiser pulled up. The officer who stepped out introduced himself as Officer Johnson, a burly man with a salt and pepper mustache and weary eyes that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else on Christmas Eve. "So you're locked out of your house?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "It's not just that," I explained, standing up and stamping my feet to restore circulation. "This is my property. I own this cottage, but my family is inside and they've locked me out. They're trespassing." Officer Johnson raised an eyebrow. "Family dispute, huh? Those are always fun during the holidays." Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Amanda appeared, this time stepping fully onto the porch. She'd changed into an elegant red dress that I'd never seen before. "Thank goodness you're here, officer," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "We were worried he might cause a scene." "Amanda, what is going on?" I demanded. "Why are you locking me out of my own cottage?" My father appeared behind her, looking distinguished in a blazer I didn't recognize. "Frederick, son, we really hoped it wouldn't come to this." "Come to what?" I felt like I was in some bizarre alternate reality. "Dad, I've spent 3 months preparing for this Christmas. I've renovated the guest rooms, planned every meal, decorated every inch of this place. And now you're acting like I'm trespassing on my own property?" "Your property?" My mother had now joined them, wearing a cocktail dress and more makeup than I'd seen her wear in years. "Frederick, honey, are you having another episode? You signed the cottage over to us months ago." "What?" I was genuinely stunned. "What are you talking about?" "I never signed anything over to you." Officer Johnson was watching this exchange with growing interest. "Ma'am, sir, do you have documentation regarding ownership of this property?" My father nodded solemnly. "We do, officer. Please come inside out of the cold." "He can come in," I said quickly. "But so am I. This is my house." My mother placed a hand on the officer's arm. "Officer, we're concerned about Frederick's mental state. He's been under a lot of stress at work, and this isn't the first time he's had memory issues. We're very worried about him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's absolutely not true. There's nothing wrong with my mental state, and I have never had memory issues." "Officer, they're lying to you." As I tried to follow them inside, Amanda blocked the doorway. "Frederick, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Through the doorway, I caught glimpses of my living room. There were at least 10 people inside, most of whom I didn't recognize. Expensive-looking luggage was piled near the stairway. The Christmas tree I'd so carefully decorated was now adorned with different ornaments, and the presents I'd wrapped and placed under it were nowhere to be seen. "Who are all those people?" I demanded. "What's going on here?" Officer Johnson turned to me with a frown. "Sir, please wait here on the porch while I speak with your family and review their documentation." But the door closed in my face before I could finish protesting. I paced the porch, watching through windows as Officer Johnson examined some papers my father handed him. My mother appeared to be crying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, while my father comforted her. The perfect picture of concerned parents dealing with a troubled son. After what seemed like an eternity, Officer Johnson emerged with my father and sister. He held a document in his hand. "Mr. Anderson, I've reviewed the property transfer document, and everything appears to be in order. According to this, you transferred ownership of this property to your parents 3 months ago." He handed me the paper. I stared at it in disbelief. It was a property deed transfer with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom, dated exactly 3 months ago. The date matched when I had called them to invite them for Christmas. "This is forged," I said immediately. "I never signed this. This isn't my signature." My father sighed heavily. "Frederick, we've been through this. You signed it in front of a notary. You said you wanted us to have the cottage because your job was relocating you to the West Coast." "What?" "I've never been offered a relocation. I've been at the same office for 8 years. This is insane." I turned to Officer Johnson. "This document is a forgery. I never signed this." Officer Johnson looked uncomfortable. "Sir, this document has been properly notarized and filed with the county. Legally, this property currently belongs to Robert and Eleanor Anderson." "But it's a forgery," I insisted. "Can't you see that? They're lying to you." My mother had joined us on the porch, tears streaming down her face. "We've been so worried about these episodes. His doctor said stress could trigger them, but we never thought it would get this bad." "I don't have a doctor for episodes." I was nearly shouting now. "They're making this all up." Officer Johnson placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Anderson, I think it would be best if you left to cool down for now. This appears to be a civil matter regarding property ownership, not a criminal trespassing situation. So, you're not going to do anything?" I couldn't believe this was happening. "If you believe the document is fraudulent, you'll need to take that up in civil court," he explained. "But tonight, based on the documentation I've seen, these people have a legal right to be here." I looked past them into the house one more time and caught sight of Jake standing in the hallway, partially hidden by the staircase. Unlike the others, he wasn't smiling or socializing. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something in his expression: discomfort, maybe even guilt, before he quickly looked away and disappeared from view. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, suddenly feeling the full weight of my situation. It was Christmas Eve in a small lake community where most businesses would be closed, and I was effectively homeless. Officer Johnson suggested the Pine View Motel about 10 miles away, which apparently remained open year-round for ice fishermen and weekend skiers. He even offered me a ride there, which I reluctantly accepted after retrieving my suitcase from my car. As we drove away from the cottage, I watched the warm glow of its windows recede in the distance, still unable to process how my perfect family Christmas had turned into this nightmare. The Pineview Motel was exactly what you'd expect from a budget accommodation in a rural area: dated furniture, a mattress with questionable springs, and heating that clanked alarmingly every 20 minutes. But it was shelter, and for that, I was grateful. After checking in, I immediately called Sam Hayes, my lawyer and old college roommate. Despite it being Christmas Eve, he picked up on the third ring. "Frederick, everything okay?" Sam's voice was partially drowned out by children laughing in the background. "No, everything is definitely not okay," I replied, and proceeded to explain the bizarre situation. Sam's holiday cheer quickly faded as he listened. "Wait, they're claiming you transferred the property to them? And the police saw a notarized document?" "Yes, but I never signed anything. It has to be a forgery." I could hear him moving to a quieter room. "The problem is, if it's been properly filed with the county and has a notary's seal, that carries a lot of weight legally. I can pull the records after the holiday, but courts take notarized documents very seriously." Sam, I'm telling you, I never signed anything. My frustration was mounting. There has to be a way to prove it's a forgery. There is, but it takes time. We'd need a forensic document examiner to analyze the signature. And even then, if they used a good forgery method, he trailed off, clearly not wanting to discourage me further. After promising to start looking into it the day after Christmas, Sam returned to his family celebration, leaving me alone with my thoughts in the dingy motel room. I couldn't just sit there, though. I needed to understand what was happening. I pulled out my laptop and started going through my files, looking for any clues. I kept meticulous records of all property-related documents, and there was absolutely nothing suggesting I had transferred ownership of the cottage. Next, I checked my email history with my family. The exchanges about Christmas were all there: my initial invitation, their enthusiastic acceptance, discussions about menu preferences and arrival times. Nothing that hinted at any property transfer. As I scrolled through my calendar, I noticed something odd. About 3 months ago, right around when the property transfer was supposedly signed, Amanda had visited me unexpectedly at my city apartment. She'd claimed she was in town for a photography assignment and wanted to catch up. It had been unusual we weren't close enough for casual drop-ins, but I'd been so pleased by the apparent thawing in our relationship that I hadn't questioned it. Now, thinking back, I remembered how she'd asked to use the bathroom connected to my home office while I prepared tea in the kitchen. She'd been in there for quite a while. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it, but now, I frantically searched through my filing cabinet, which I'd brought with me to the cottage. Several important documents seemed to be missing, including my checkbook with signature samples. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as pieces started coming together. I checked my bank statements next, going back 3 months. There were several small transfers, all under $500, to accounts I didn't recognize. Each was small enough to avoid triggering the fraud alert I had set up for transactions over $500, but together they added up to nearly $10,000. I tried calling the bank, but their customer service was closed for the holiday. Instead, I called Maggie Williams, an old family friend who worked at the local bank branch near the lake. I knew I was imposing on Christmas Eve, but desperation overrode politeness. "Frederick, is everything all right?" Maggie answered, concern evident in her voice. "Not really, Maggie. I'm sorry to bother you during the holidays, but I need to ask you something important." I explained the situation as briefly as I could. There was a long pause before Maggie responded. "Frederick, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I saw your family at the bank about 3 months ago. They were with some man in an expensive suit. I'd never seen him before. They were discussing property investments around the lake. Did you hear any specifics?" "No. They moved to Gerald's office. He's the new manager, but they seemed very intense. Your sister was particularly friendly with the man in the suit." She hesitated. "Frederick, there have been rumors about development plans for Evergreen Lake. Some big resort company has been quietly buying up properties." This was new information that made my head spin. The area around Evergreen Lake had always been mostly private cottages and small local businesses. The idea of a large resort development seemed out of place with the community's character. We talked for a few more minutes before Maggie had to return to her family. After hanging up, I lay back on the motel bed, trying to make sense of it all. If what Maggie said was true, this went beyond a simple family dispute. There was something much bigger happening. Just as I was about to try calling Jake, my phone rang. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Frederick." Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. "I can't talk long. They think I'm in the bathroom." "Jake, what the hell is going on?" I demanded. "I need to tell you something important, but not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Early, like 7? At Donnie's Diner in town?" "Jake, I have to go." The call ended abruptly. I stared at the phone, both frustrated and hopeful. Jake had seemed uncomfortable earlier when I'd spotted him at the cottage. Perhaps he was having second thoughts about whatever scheme the rest of my family was involved in. Sleep was nearly impossible that night. I tossed and turned on the lumpy mattress, my mind racing with questions and theories. Outside, snow began to fall heavily, adding to my sense of isolation. The cottage had always been my safe harbor, and now it had been taken from me through what appeared to be an elaborate deception involving my own family. By the time dawn broke, I had already showered and was preparing to meet Jake. I arrived at Donnie's diner at 6:30, ordered coffee, and waited, watching the door anxiously while reviewing what I knew so far. 1. Someone had forged my signature on a property transfer document. 2. Amanda had likely stolen documents from my apartment 3 months ago. 3. Small amounts of money had been siphoned from my account. 4. My family was somehow involved with a man interested in property development at the lake. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was still incomplete. I hoped Jake would provide the missing parts. At precisely 7 o'clock, the bell above the diner door jingled, and Jake entered, looking like he hadn't slept much either. He scanned the nearly empty restaurant, spotted me, and hurried over to my booth. "Did anyone follow you?" he asked immediately, his voice low as he slid into the seat opposite me. "Follow me?" "No, I don't think so," I replied, surprised by his paranoia. "Jake, what is going on? Why did our family lock me out of my own cottage?" Jake ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's worse than you think, Frederick. So much worse." Jake looked over his shoulder once more before leaning across the table, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom and Dad are in serious trouble, Frederick. They've lost almost everything." The waitress approached with a coffee pot, and Jake immediately fell silent. Only after she'd filled his cup and walked away did he continue. "About a year ago, Dad made some really bad investments. He lost most of their retirement savings. Then he tried to recover by gambling first, the casinos in Atlantic City, then online poker. He just kept digging the hole deeper." I sat back, processing this information. Our father had always projected an image of financial success. He'd worked as a financial advisor for most of his career, priding himself on helping others manage their money while apparently mismanaging his own. "They're at least $300,000 in debt," Jake continued. "Credit cards maxed out, second mortgage on their house, loans from people you don't want to owe money to. They were desperate. And this connects to my cottage how?" I prompted, though I was beginning to see the outline of what must have happened. "That's where Marcus Warner comes in." Jake's expression darkened. "He's a property developer from Chicago. He's been buying up land around Evergreen Lake for the past 2 years, usually through shell companies so no one realizes it's all going to the same owner." "The man in the expensive suit at the bank," I murmured, remembering Maggie's description. Jake nodded. "He has plans for a massive luxury resort. Hotels, golf courses, condos, private marinas, the works. He's calling it Evergreen Estates. It would completely transform the lake. That would never get approved," I countered. "The environmental regulations alone. That's why he needs people on the inside," Jake interrupted. "He's been cultivating relationships with local officials, making campaign contributions, offering future positions in the resort management. And for properties he can't buy outright, he finds other ways to acquire them." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside, like forging property transfers. "Exactly. Marcus approached Mom and Dad about 6 months ago. Somehow he knew about their financial troubles. He offered them a way out, help him acquire key properties, and he'd clear their debts plus give them a percentage of the development. And they agreed to this? To steal my property? The betrayal cut deep, even though I'd never been under any illusions about my parents' favoritism toward my siblings." Jake looked ashamed. "It wasn't just them, Frederick. Amanda is actually dating Marcus now. She stands to become wealthy through all this. And I." He trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. "You were part of this too." I finished for him. "At first, yes," he admitted. "They pitched it as a family business opportunity. Said you were too straight-laced to ever get involved, that you'd try to stop the development because of Grandpa's environmental values. Amanda visited you to get signature samples, and they hired someone to create the forgery. And the money from my accounts? Test runs, to see if you'd notice small withdrawals. When you didn't, they got bolder." I struggled to contain my anger. "Why are you telling me this now, Jake? Had a sudden attack of conscience?" He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. "Because of what I found yesterday. Scroll through the photos. The phone contained pictures of documents, plans, contracts, emails. As I swiped through them, my anger gave way to horror. The development plan wasn't just about luxury accommodations. It included provisions for industrial waste disposal, circumventing environmental regulations through technical loopholes, and projections for acceptable pollution levels in the lake. Marcus doesn't just want to build a resort, Jake explained. He needs a place to handle waste from his other properties and industrial partners. Evergreen Lake is perfect remote enough that few people would notice at first, with enough water volume to dilute the evidence. This is criminal, I said, still scrolling through the damning evidence. This would destroy the lake ecosystem. Grandpa spent his life protecting this lake. He was on the original conservation committee that established the environmental protections. I know. Jake took the phone back. When I found these documents in Marcus's briefcase yesterday, I couldn't keep pretending this was just about money. The lake would be dead within 5 years if these plans go through. Just then, Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. His face went pale as he read it. "What is it?" I asked. "Marcus knows some documents are missing. They're checking everyone's phones and belongings." He stood up abruptly. "I need to get back and act normal before they realize I'm gone. They think I went for an early morning run. Jake, we need to take this to the authorities. It's not that simple. Marcus has connections with the local police. Why do you think Officer Johnson was so quick to accept that property transfer? We need more evidence, and we need to be careful about who we trust." Jake glanced toward the diner window and froze. "Oh no." I followed his gaze and spotted a black SUV moving slowly through the parking lot. A man in the passenger seat was scanning the building. "That's one of Marcus's security guys," Jake whispered urgently. "They must have tracked my phone. You need to go. Now. Come with me," I urged. Jake shook his head. "I need to delete these photos and act normal. If they realize we're both onto them, they'll destroy all the evidence. Go out the back. I'll contact you when I can." Before I could protest further, Jake was walking toward the front door, casually, as if he'd just stopped in for a quick coffee. I dropped some money on the table and headed for the kitchen, explaining to the confused waitress that I needed to make a quick exit. Thankfully, she seemed to find it more amusing than suspicious, and pointed me toward the rear delivery entrance. As I slipped out into the alley behind the diner, I heard the front door chime. I didn't wait to see if it was Marcus's men or just another customer. I hurried to where I'd parked my car a block away, constantly checking over my shoulder. Only when I was driving away from town did I allow myself to think through what Jake had revealed. This wasn't just about my cottage anymore. It was about preventing an environmental disaster and exposing a criminal conspiracy that included my own family. I needed help, but as Jake had pointed out, I couldn't trust the local authorities. I needed to build a case strong enough that it couldn't be ignored or brushed aside. And I needed to do it quickly, before Marcus Warner could move forward with his plans for Evergreen Lake. The motel room felt even smaller and more depressing when I returned. I paced the worn carpet trying to formulate a plan. Jake's revelations had transformed my understanding of the situation. This wasn't just a family betrayal. It was a criminal conspiracy with potentially devastating environmental consequences. I needed allies, evidence, and legal leverage. Most importantly, I needed people who couldn't be bought or intimidated by Marcus Warner. My first call was to Sam Hayes again. This time, I shared everything Jake had told me. "This changes things," Sam said after listening to the full story. "If Warner has local officials in his pocket, we can't rely on normal channels. We need to go above their heads, state-level environmental protection agencies, maybe even federal." "What about the property theft?" I asked. "That's still important, but frankly, it might be easier to address as part of the larger case against Warner. Proving forgery takes time, but environmental violations and corruption of public officials, that gets attention fast." Sam promised to start making discreet inquiries with contacts he trusted, but warned me to be careful. "If this guy is as connected and unscrupulous as you say, he won't hesitate to silence threats to his plans." After ending the call with Sam, I considered my next move. I needed more evidence than just Jake's word and some hastily photographed documents. I needed someone who could help investigate Marcus Warner's operations more thoroughly. With some reluctance, I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in over 2 years: Caroline Miller. We'd dated for about a year after my divorce, but our relationship had ended badly when her work as an investigative reporter consistently took precedence over our time together. The irony wasn't lost on me that this same quality made her exactly the person I needed now. To my surprise, Caroline answered on the first ring. "Frederick Anderson. I never thought I'd see your name on my caller ID again." "Hello, Caroline," I said, uncertain how to proceed. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this. Let me guess. You need something only a nosy reporter can provide." Her tone was sarcastic but not entirely unfriendly. "Actually, yes. I decided honesty was the best approach. I've stumbled onto something big, and I need help from someone I can trust who knows how to dig into corporate dealings." "I'm listening." The professional curiosity in her voice told me I'd made the right call. I explained the situation, starting with being locked out of my cottage and ending with Jake's revelations about Marcus Warner's plans for Evergreen Lake. "Warner?" Caroline interrupted. "Marcus Warner of Warner Development Group?" "Yes, that's him. You know of him?" "Know of him?" "Frederick, I've been tracking that guy's operations for months. He's been involved in at least 3 questionable development projects across the Midwest. There are rumors of environmental violations, bribery of officials, even connections to organized crime for financing. But he's careful, always works through shell companies and proxies. I've never been able to gather enough concrete evidence for a story. This was better than I'd hoped. So you'd be interested in helping me?" "Interested doesn't begin to cover it. If Warner is planning what you described at Evergreen Lake, and we can prove it, that would be the break I've been looking for. When can we meet?" We arranged to meet that afternoon at a cafe in the next town over, where we'd be less likely to be recognized. Before heading out, I made one more call to Diane Franklin, an environmental lawyer whose name I'd found associated with the Evergreen Lake Conservation Trust, the organization my grandfather had helped establish decades ago. Diane was initially hesitant when I called out of the blue on Christmas Day, but became increasingly interested as I outlined the situation. "The trust has been worried about the pattern of property acquisitions around the lake," she confirmed. "We've been monitoring water quality because of rumors about development, but we hadn't connected it to Warner specifically." She agreed to meet with Caroline and me, bringing whatever information the trust had already gathered on the lake's current environmental status and the regulatory protections in place. By mid-afternoon, the 3 of us were huddled in a corner booth at Milltown Cafe, 20 miles from Evergreen Lake. Caroline arrived first, her curly red hair just as I remembered it, though cut shorter now. She'd brought a laptop and several files, already deep into research mode when I walked in. Diane joined us shortly after, a tall, stern-looking woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her head. "The environmental regulations around Evergreen Lake are actually quite robust," Diane explained after introductions were made. "Your grandfather was instrumental in establishing the watershed protection ordinances back in the 80s, which is precisely why Warner needs to acquire properties through less than legal means," Caroline added, turning her laptop to show us a complex web of corporate entities. "He can't just build whatever he wants, even with corrupt officials helping. He needs to control enough land to create leverage." "And my cottage?" I asked. Diane studied a map of the lake. "Your property is particularly valuable because it includes 300 feet of shoreline at the narrowest part of the lake. The original ordinances specifically protect that area as a natural filtration zone. If that area were to be developed, the entire ecosystem could be compromised," Caroline finished. "Plus, your property provides the most direct access route for construction equipment to the north side of the lake, where most of Warner's other acquisitions are located." The pieces were falling into place. My cottage wasn't just another property, it was a keystone in Warner's plans. Without it, his entire development scheme would be more difficult and expensive to execute. We spent the next 2 hours formulating a plan. Caroline would use her journalistic resources to investigate Warner's corporate structure and previous developments. Diane would prepare legal briefings on the environmental protections in place and document any current violations. And I would focus on proving the fraudulent property transfer and gathering any additional evidence from Jake. As our meeting concluded, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Frederick?" It was my apartment building's manager in the city. "I'm really sorry to bother you during the holidays, but there's been an incident at your apartment." The security alarm was triggered, and when the security company responded, they found your door broken open and your place ransacked. My heart sank. "Was anything taken?" "Hard to say without you here, but your computer is missing, and the place is a mess. The police have been notified, but they're asking if you can come identify what's missing." "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised, then hung up and explained the situation to Caroline and Diane. "They're looking for Jake's evidence," Caroline said immediately, "and probably trying to intimidate you." "It's working," I admitted. The violation of my home, coming so soon after the theft of my cottage, left me feeling vulnerable and exposed. "You can't go back to that motel," Diane decided. "It's too obvious. You can stay at my guest house. It's isolated, and no one would connect you to me." I gratefully accepted her offer. But first, I needed to check on my apartment. Caroline insisted on coming with me, saying she needed to document the break-in as part of the investigation. We agreed to meet Diane the following morning to continue our planning. The 2-hour drive to the city was tense, with Caroline periodically checking her rearview mirror to ensure we weren't being followed. We discussed strategy, filling in gaps in each other's knowledge about Warner and his operations. Despite the circumstances, I found myself remembering why I'd been attracted to Caroline in the first place: her sharp mind, unwavering determination, and surprising moments of humor even in serious situations. When we arrived at my apartment building, the manager met us in the lobby. "The police have already been and gone," he informed us. "They took some fingerprints, but honestly, they didn't seem very hopeful. Said there've been several break-ins in the area recently." The scene in my apartment was worse than I'd imagined. Drawers had been emptied onto the floor, furniture upended, even picture frames smashed. But amidst the chaos, something stood out: a piece of paper, placed deliberately on my kitchen counter, held down by a single coffee mug. It was a printout of an email from my company's HR department, dated yesterday, requesting my presence at a meeting the day after Christmas to discuss concerns raised about recent behavior. The message had been highlighted, and someone had scrawled at the bottom, "Back off or lose everything." "They're threatening your job now," Caroline observed, photographing the note before picking it up with a tissue. "They want to isolate you, completely take your property, your home, and now your career." I sank onto the only chair still upright in my living room. "This is getting dangerous, Caroline. These people clearly have no limits." She knelt in front of me, her expression resolute. "That's exactly why we can't back down, Frederick. People like Warner count on intimidation to silence opposition. If we give in, they'll just move on to their next victim." She took my hand. "I promise you, we're going to expose this operation and get your property back. But we need to be smart and careful." We spent an hour salvaging what we could from my apartment. Most of my important documents were already at the cottage, but I gathered clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items that held sentimental value. As we were leaving, my phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. "They know I helped you. Not safe. Going to stay with college friend. Will call when I can." With one more person in hiding and threats escalating, the stakes were clear. We weren't just fighting for my cottage anymore, we were fighting against a corrupt system that allowed people like Marcus Warner to steamroll over individuals and environmental protections alike. And somehow, that made me more determined than ever to see this through. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Diane's guest house became our makeshift headquarters, a cozy but rustic cabin nestled in a pine forest about 15 miles from Evergreen Lake. With Caroline's investigative skills, Diane's legal expertise, and my first-hand knowledge of the cottage and my family's involvement, we formed an unlikely but effective team. Jake remained in hiding but sent periodic text updates from different burner phones. He'd managed to salvage some of the evidence from Marcus's briefcase before fleeing and was arranging to get it to us securely. Caroline made remarkable progress tracing Marcus Warner's business dealings. "His pattern is consistent," she explained, spreading documents across Diane's dining table. "He establishes shell companies to purchase properties, corrupts local officials for zoning changes and permit approvals, and uses intimidation tactics against holdouts. But the environmental violations are what will sink him, Diane added. I've been in contact with state-level EPA officials I trust. They're very interested in the water testing data our conservation trust has collected over the past year. There are already disturbing elevations in certain chemicals at the north end of the lake. That's where most of his properties are located, I noted, studying the map we'd created with red pins marking Warner's known acquisitions. Exactly. He's already begun preliminary site preparation, disguised as property improvements. But our samples suggest he's testing disposal methods. Diane's expression was grim. If he proceeds with his full plan, Evergreen Lake would be effectively dead within 5 years. My grandfather's beloved lake, where he'd taught me to fish and respect nature, where generations of families had built memories, would become a toxic dump, all so Marcus Warner could save money on waste disposal for his other properties. On the morning of the 4th day, we received the break we'd been waiting for. Jake had entrusted the additional documents to his college roommate, who delivered them to a drop point Caroline had arranged. The evidence was damning internal memos explicitly discussing the forgery of my property transfer, bribes paid to specific local officials, and detailed plans for circumventing environmental regulations. This is more than enough for the state authorities to act, Diane declared after reviewing the materials. With this, plus our water testing data and Caroline's research on the corporate structure, we can bypass the corrupted local officials entirely. Caroline was already making calls to her contacts at state-level law enforcement and regulatory agencies. They're sending a team tomorrow, she reported, barely containing her excitement. This is big, Frederick. Much bigger than just your cottage. Warner's operation spans 3 states. What about my parents and Amanda? I asked, conflicted about their fate. Despite their betrayal, they were still my family. That's complicated, Diane admitted. They've clearly participated in fraud and conspiracy, but their cooperation could be valuable in building the case against Warner. The prosecutors might offer them a deal. I nodded, not entirely sure how I felt about that possibility. Part of me wanted justice for their betrayal, while another part recognized that they'd been manipulated by Warner, their financial desperation making them vulnerable to his schemes. With state authorities mobilizing, we needed to act quickly to secure additional evidence before Warner realized the net was closing. We devised a plan to confront Warner directly at a meeting he'd scheduled with potential investors at my cottage. Caroline had learned about it through her sources, a gathering to showcase the centerpiece of his development plans. It's risky, Diane warned. Warner won't be alone, and he's already demonstrated he's dangerous. But the distraction will allow the state environmental team to access the North Shore properties without interference, Caroline countered. And Frederick deserves to confront the man who stole his home. I appreciated Caroline's support, but was more motivated by the practical aspects. I can wear a recording device. With Warner surrounded by investors, he'll be trying to impress them. He might say things that further incriminate him. After much discussion, we agreed on the approach. Caroline would pose as my legal assistant, Diane would coordinate with the state environmental team, and I would confront Warner directly. We spent the rest of the day preparing, reviewing the evidence we'd gathered, and ensuring our recording equipment was functioning properly. That night, unable to sleep, I stepped outside onto the guest house porch. The air was crisp and clear, stars brilliant in the winter sky. Caroline joined me, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also ready to end this. I keep thinking about my grandfather, how heartbroken he'd be to see what's happening to his beloved lake. From what you've told me about him, I think he'd be proud of what you're doing now," Caroline said softly, fighting back against corruption, protecting the environment he loved. "I hope so." I turned to look at her. "Caroline, I want to thank you. You didn't have to help me, especially after how things ended between us." She smiled slightly. "Don't get sentimental on me now, Frederick. Besides, this is the biggest story of my career. My editor is already talking Pulitzer. Still, I appreciate it." I hesitated, then added, "And I'm sorry for not being more supportive of your work when we were together. I understand now how important it is." "Water under the bridge," she replied, but her expression had softened. "Let's focus on tomorrow. After that, well, we'll see." The next morning, we set out for the confrontation. I was wired with a recording device provided by one of Caroline's law enforcement contacts. We timed our arrival to coincide with the investor meeting, which Jake had confirmed was scheduled for 11 a.m. As we approached the cottage, I felt a surge of emotions: anger at the theft of my property, determination to expose Warner's schemes, and an unexpected pang of loss at seeing the familiar structure that had meant so much to me throughout my life. Caroline squeezed my hand reassuringly before we exited her car. "Remember, stay calm and get him talking. The more he reveals, the stronger our case." We walked up to the front door, and I rang the bell, a strange experience at my own home. A few moments later, the door was opened by a man I didn't recognize, dressed in a dark suit with an earpiece. "Can I help you?" he asked, his stance making it clear he was security rather than a guest. "I'm Frederick Anderson. This is my property, and I need to speak with Marcus Warner immediately." The man's expression didn't change, but he spoke quietly into a wrist microphone. After a brief exchange, he stepped aside. "Mr. Warner will see you in the study." We were led through my own home, now transformed with expensive furniture I didn't recognize and artwork that wasn't mine. In the living room, about a dozen people in business attire were examining presentation boards showing renderings of a massive resort complex. They looked up curiously as we passed. The study, formerly my grandfather's reading room, which I'd preserved exactly as he left it, had been converted into a sleek office space. Behind the desk sat a man I assumed was Marcus Warner, mid-40s, immaculately dressed, with the confident posture of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Mr. Anderson," he said smoothly, rising to greet us. "I was wondering when you might pay us a visit, and you've brought assistance." His eyes lingered on Caroline with a hint of recognition. "This is my legal consultant," I said, deliberately vague. "We're here to discuss the fraudulent transfer of my property and your plans for Evergreen Lake." Warner smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fraudulent? That's a serious accusation. The transfer was properly executed and filed. As for my plans, I'm creating a world-class resort that will bring jobs and prosperity to this backwater region." Along with toxic waste and environmental destruction, Caroline interjected. Warner's smile faltered slightly. "I don't believe we've been introduced, Miss Miller." Carolyn Miller. Recognition flashed in his eyes. The reporter. "I see. This meeting just became much more interesting." He gestured to the security man who had escorted us in. "Make sure we're not disturbed." The door closed, leaving just the three of us. "Let's speak frankly," Warner said, his pleasant facade dropping. "You're out of your depth, both of you. This development will proceed regardless of your amateur investigation. I have too much invested and too many important people committed." "Including my parents and sister?" I asked. "How did you get them involved in your scheme?" Warner laughed. "They were almost embarrassingly eager. Your father's financial mismanagement left them vulnerable. And your sister? Well, Amanda has expensive tastes and limited talents. As for Jake, he was a useful tool until recently. And my property? Why forge a transfer rather than simply make an offer?" "Your grandfather's environmental protections," Warner replied dismissively. "They're attached to the deed, but when the property transferred to your parents, certain reinterpretations became possible with the right legal team and cooperative officials." "You mean with bribes and corruption?" Caroline stated flatly. Warner's expression hardened. "I prefer to think of it as aligning incentives. Now, what exactly do you hope to accomplish here? Even if you could prove the transfer was somehow improper, which you can't, the development is already approved. The contracts are signed. We know about the waste disposal plans," I said, hoping to provoke him. "We have the water testing data showing elevated toxins where you've already started preliminary work." For the first time, Warner looked genuinely concerned. "Who else knows about this?" Before I could respond, the door burst open. Amanda stood there, looking distressed. "Marcus, the investors are asking about people in boats, taking water samples on the North Shore." Warner's face contorted with anger. "What? Get security down there immediately." As he moved toward the door, I stepped into his path. It's too late, Warner. State environmental protection agents and law enforcement are already collecting evidence. They have everything: the forged documents, the bribery records, the environmental testing data, and your internal memos about waste disposal. You're bluffing, he snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I? I nodded toward Caroline, who held up her phone showing a text message from Diane. Teams in place. Evidence secured. Backup arriving. Warner lunged for the phone, but I intercepted him, using my height advantage to hold him back. It's over. Your development is finished, and you're facing serious charges. His composure shattered completely. You think you've won? Your family was part of this from the beginning. They'll go down with me. That's their choice, I replied calmly. They chose greed over family, and now they'll face the consequences. Amanda had been watching this exchange with growing alarm. Marcus, what is he talking about? You said this was all legal, that Frederick had agreed to the transfer but was having memory problems. Warner ignored her, focusing his rage on me. You don't understand what you're interfering with. This development has backing from people you don't want as enemies. Before I could respond, commotion erupted from the main room. Raised voices, heavy footsteps, and the unmistakable announcement. State police. Everyone remain where you are. Warner made a desperate move, shoving past Amanda and running toward the rear of the cottage. I followed in pursuit, chasing him through the kitchen and out onto the back porch. He headed for the dock, where a boat was moored. Warner, stop, I called, gaining ground on the slippery path. We had prepared for this possibility. Diane had boats positioned on the lake to intercept any escape attempt. As Warner reached the dock, my father appeared from around the boathouse, looking confused by the commotion. Seeing Warner running, then me in pursuit, he made a split-second decision that shocked me. He stepped directly into Warner's path, blocking his escape. Robert, get out of my way, Warner demanded. My father stood firm. No, Marcus, this has gone far enough. Warner tried to shove past him, but my father, despite being 20 years older, managed to grab him. They struggled at the edge of the dock, teetering dangerously over the icy water. I reached them just as Warner broke free of my father's grip. In his desperation to escape, Warner made a fateful miscalculation, trying to jump from the dock to the boat. His foot caught the mooring line, and he plunged into the frigid lake with a startled shout. The shock of the freezing water seemed to drain Warner's fight instantly. He flailed, gasping, clearly not a strong swimmer. Despite everything he'd done, I couldn't stand by and watch him drown. I grabbed a life ring from the dock and threw it to him while my father helped me pull him to safety. As Warner lay coughing and shivering on the dock, state police officers caught up to us, quickly taking him into custody. More officers were leading my mother and Amanda from the cottage, along with several of Warner's associates. My father, looking suddenly old and defeated, turned to me. Frederick, I don't expect you to forgive me. What we did was unforgivable. But when I saw what was really happening, what Marcus planned for the lake, I couldn't let it continue. I didn't know what to say. The betrayal was still too raw, the hurt too deep. But something had shifted. My father had ultimately chosen the right side, even if far too late. As the officers led my father away, Caroline joined me on the dock. They found everything, she reported. Documents, computer records, even cash payoffs to local officials. Warner's operation is completely exposed. I looked at my cottage, swarming with law enforcement and environmental officials. This wasn't the Christmas I had planned, but somehow it felt right. My grandfather had dedicated his life to protecting Evergreen Lake, and now, in my own way, I had continued his legacy. What happens now? I asked. Caroline took my hand. Now, we make sure justice is served, and then you rebuild. 6 months later, I stood on the dock of my lakeside cottage, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. It had been a long road to reclaim my property and my life, but standing there in the early summer evening, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for too long. The legal proceedings against Marcus Warner and his associates had moved with surprising speed, fueled by the mountain of evidence we had gathered and the high-profile nature of the environmental crimes. Warner himself was now awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty to multiple charges including fraud, bribery, conspiracy, and environmental violations. His plea deal required full cooperation, which had implicated dozens of corrupt officials and business associates across 3 states. My parents had also made plea agreements, acknowledging their roles in the property theft and conspiracy. Their cooperation had earned them reduced sentences. My father would serve 1 year in a minimum security facility, while my mother received probation and community service. They had also been ordered to make financial restitution to me and the other victims of Warner's schemes. The cottage had been legally returned to me within weeks, though it had taken longer to undo the changes Warner had made to the interior. I'd carefully restored my grandfather's reading room, replacing the antique desk and bookshelves that had been removed. The rest of the cottage I had slowly returned to its former state, erasing Warner's attempt to transform it into a sleek executive retreat. Amanda had moved to California, unable to face the community or family after the scandal. Our relationship remained strained, with only occasional tense phone calls. She had avoided jail time by cooperating extensively with prosecutors, but the experience had clearly shaken her. In our last conversation, she had almost but not quite apologized, saying only that she never thought it would go so far. Jake, on the other hand, had become an unexpected ally. His early decision to help me had been crucial in exposing Warner's scheme. He now worked with the Evergreen Lake Conservation Trust, using his business background to help secure the lake's long-term protection. We'd begun rebuilding our relationship, finding common ground in our shared commitment to our grandfather's legacy. The most unexpected development had been with Caroline. What began as a professional alliance had rekindled feelings we'd both thought long buried. We were taking things slowly, both wary of repeating past mistakes, but the shared intensity of the past months had created a bond neither of us could deny. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Caroline's voice broke into my reverie as she joined me on the dock, 2 glasses of iced tea in hand. "Just reflecting," I replied, accepting one of the glasses. 6 months ago, I was locked out in the cold, watching my family celebrate Christmas in my stolen home. Now Warner is going to prison. The lake is protected under a new conservation agreement, and you're hosting a community celebration, she finished, gesturing toward the cottage, where preparations were underway for tomorrow's event. The Evergreen Lake Summer Festival had been my idea, a way to bring the community together after the divisive scandal. The lakefront property would be open to the public for a day of swimming, boating, environmental education, and a fundraiser for the expanded Conservation Trust. "Do you think your grandfather would be proud?" Caroline asked, knowing how often my thoughts turned to him. "I think he would," I said after a moment. "Not just because we stopped Warner, but because something better came from it. The lake has stronger protections now than ever before, and people around here have a new appreciation for what they almost lost." The sound of car tires on gravel announced a new arrival. Jake stepped out of his truck, waving as he spotted us on the dock. He was carrying rolled-up posters for tomorrow's educational displays. "The state environmental team just confirmed they'll have a booth," he called as he approached. "And 3 more local businesses signed up as sponsors. This is going to be bigger than we planned." "That's great news," I replied, genuinely pleased. The community's enthusiasm for the festival had exceeded all expectations. As the 3 of us walked back to the cottage, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since last Christmas. The family I'd tried so desperately to reconnect with had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Yet from that betrayal had come new relationships, stronger community bonds, and a deeper connection to my grandfather's values. Diane was already at the cottage, directing volunteers in setting up tables and displays for tomorrow's festival. The governor's office called, she informed us as we entered. "They're sending a representative to announce the new lake protection legislation. They're calling it the Anderson Conservation Act in honor of your grandfather." That news hit me with unexpected emotion. My grandfather had spent decades fighting for Evergreen Lake's protection, often with little recognition or support. Now, his name would be permanently associated with the expanded conservation efforts that resulted from exposing Warner's scheme. "He would have hated all the fuss," I said, smiling through sudden tears. "But he would have loved the result." As evening fell, volunteers departed, promising to return early the next morning. Caroline, Jake, Diane, and I sat on the porch, looking out over the tranquil lake. The water reflected the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky, undisturbed now by development threats or toxic contamination. "You know," Jake said thoughtfully, "when all this started, I was just thinking about money. Warner made it sound so reasonable: progress, development, jobs. I never stopped to consider what we were really trading away." "That's how guys like Warner operate," Caroline observed. "They present exploitation as opportunity, destruction as progress. It works because people want to believe it. The important thing is that you recognize the truth when it mattered," I told Jake. "You chose differently than Mom and Dad, than Amanda." "Speaking of choices," Diane interjected, "have you decided what you're going to do with the property long-term, Frederick? The trust's offer to purchase a conservation easement is still open." I had been considering the offer for weeks. The easement would allow me to retain ownership while permanently restricting development on the property, preserving the shoreline in its natural state. In return, I would receive a substantial tax benefit and a payment that would cover what I'd spent fighting to reclaim the property. "I've decided to accept," I confirmed, "with one condition: that the easement includes public access to the shoreline trail year-round. Grandpa always believed the lake belonged to everyone, not just property owners." Diane nodded approvingly. "I'll draw up the paperwork. It's a fitting tribute to his legacy." As our conversation continued into the night, I found myself reflecting on the lessons of the past 6 months. I had learned that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by shared values and mutual respect. I had discovered that fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible, is always worthwhile. And I had realized that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted can lead to finding what you truly need. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, perfect weather for the festival. By 9 a.m., cars were already lining the road leading to the cottage, families arriving with picnic baskets and swimming gear. Jake had set up educational displays about lake ecology, while Diane manned a booth collecting signatures for new conservation initiatives. Caroline moved through the crowd, notebook in hand, gathering quotes for her follow-up article on the community's recovery from Warner's scheme. Standing on the porch, watching children racing toward the water, and parents spreading blankets on the lawn, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what the property was meant for: not a toxic waste-enabling resort, but a place where people could connect with nature and each other. A familiar figure approached the porch, moving slowly with the aid of a walking stick. It took me a moment to recognize my father, thinner and grayer than when I had last seen him. His plea agreement had allowed him to delay beginning his sentence until after the environmental remediation work was completed. "Frederick," he said hesitantly, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "I wasn't sure if I should come today." I studied him, still processing my complicated feelings. "Why did you?" "To see what you've created here," he replied, gesturing to the festival. "And to tell you something I should have said years ago. I'm proud of you, son. What you've done for this lake, for this community. It's remarkable." The words I'd wanted to hear for so long now brought a confusing mix of emotions. "It's a little late for that, don't you think?" He nodded sadly. "Far too late. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Frederick. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the man you've become, even if I played no part in it. Your grandfather would be proud too." I didn't invite him up to the porch, but I did descend the steps to stand beside him. "You're right about one thing: I'm not doing this for forgiveness, yours or mine. I'm doing it because it's right, because this place matters." "I understand that now," he said quietly. "Too late to matter, but I do understand." We stood in silence, watching the festival unfold around us. Finally, I said, "You should see the educational displays before you go. Jake did a good job with them." A hint of hope flickered in his eyes. "Jake's here? I'd like to see him before I go away." "He's down by the dock," I replied, not making any promises about how Jake would receive him. As my father walked slowly toward the lake, Caroline joined me. "Everything okay?" "Getting there," I answered honestly, one day at a time. The festival continued throughout the day, exceeding all expectations. The governor's representative arrived to announce the Anderson Conservation Act, prompting cheers from the assembled crowd. Local businesses donated food and drinks, musicians set up near the boathouse, and children participated in nature-themed games organized by the Conservation Trust. As sunset approached, I found myself back on the dock, watching families pack up to head home, children tired but happy after a day of swimming and exploration. Caroline slipped her hand into mine. "What are you thinking now?" she asked. "That this is what healing looks like," I replied. "Not forgetting the betrayal, but creating something new and meaningful from it." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You did good, Frederick. Really good." Later that evening, after the last visitors had departed and we'd cleaned up the festival grounds, I gathered with my new family, Caroline, Jake, Diane, and several neighbors who had become close friends during our fight against Warner. We sat around a bonfire on the shore, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Looking around at these people who had stood by me, who shared my values and vision for the lake, I realized that I hadn't lost a family after all. I'd found a better one, built on honesty, mutual respect, and shared purpose. The cottage would always be special to me, a connection to my grandfather and the values he instilled. But now it represented something more, a reminder that sometimes the most painful betrayals can lead to unexpected blessings, and that fighting for what matters, no matter the personal cost, is always the right choice. As the fire burned low and stars reflected on the peaceful lake, I felt a sense of gratitude for the journey, difficult as it had been, that had brought me here. I had lost my family's love, but gained something far more valuable, a life of integrity, purpose, and authentic connection. If you've ever faced betrayal from those closest to you, I hope my story offers some comfort. Sometimes the hardest challenges reveal our true strength and lead us to where we're meant to be. Have you ever discovered unexpected gifts in your most difficult moments? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if you found meaning in this journey, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that even from our darkest moments, something beautiful can emerge. Thank you for listening, and may you find peace and purpose in your own life's unexpected turns.